This morning's story of clover and barley, what a beautiful way to express and describe these moments of hope that we can cultivate for ourselves and for one another. In our opening hymn, we sang about every casual corner blooming into a shrine. And that imagery for me has always been so powerful and helpful in thinking about what it means to cultivate a hopefulness in my life. The other night, President Obama, former President Obama, gave a graduation speech, and in it, he said, "If the world is going to get better, it's going to be up to you." And I don't think of those words as just being sort of dedicated to the people who were graduating on that night or who are entering into their graduation. I think of those words as being dedicated to each one of us. And so I want to talk to you this morning about having a hopefulness, but ensuring that it's a wise hopefulness or a mature hopefulness, something that is based in reality. I mean, we are facing such hard realities right now, as Rev Lo lined out in her welcome to you this morning. And so how can we continue to build those shrines in the corners of our spaces? How can we continue to seek out those beautiful flowers in our lives? Knowing, too, that there is such devastation happening. I think the number at this point of deaths has risen to 90,000 in this country and over 250,000 worldwide. And that is true. And also, people are responding with such incredible courage to one another in neighborhoods and in local organizing and in growing foods in their gardens and in reaching out across the borders to ensure, are you okay? Is everyone okay? Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "If a person will worship something, have no doubt about that. We may think our tribute is paid in secret in the dark recesses of our hearts, but it will come out. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming." So the flowers that we pick and the things that we focus on, the ways that we turn our attention, and the things that we choose to cultivate within ourselves, they shape us day in and day out. I was a long time ago actually taken to a workshop given by David Ellis, the Falling Awake workshop. And this was in my 20s. And so as I've kind of come back to looking at that material now, I'm struck by how incredibly powerful the material was. And that the work that I did in this 3-day workshop actually had fruit that bore out in my life. At that time, I wasn't in graduate school yet. And I wrote to myself, I want a future where I am working with children. I want a future where I'm making a better world. I want a future where I am making a difference. And I look at my life now, some 20 odd years later, and I think, my goodness, what a powerful exercise, even in just like expressing the desire or the hope for what could come next. A wise hope acknowledges reality. In Al-Anon, we talk about this stance, this acknowledgement of reality, not telling ourselves stories to cover up how bad things might be or to help ourselves numb to reality. It's that kind of Pollyanna optimism isn't very helpful to us, but neither do we allow ourselves pessimism. Back in 2016, I was standing in Kesey Square and Rabbi Ruhi from our local Jewish temple said to us, "We have no time to despair." And I did a little looking at that quote or that statement to see, like, where does this come from? Where does this beautiful thing come from, right? This call to hope even when things look dire. It's a Toni Morrison quote, and maybe she quoted it from somewhere else, but this quote is so beautiful to me. She says, "This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding. And though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, just like art." I think what I'm trying to get at here is the power of the creative impulse in response to hard times in our lives. And we're facing such hard times. It would be so easy. And in fact, it's important to acknowledge the pain of that. And then there's the question of, now what? And so a creative response is the kind of response that I'm calling for in this moment for myself, and that I'm inviting for you. We do have a choice. And knowing that, exercising that, is what I would call a mature hope. It's not based on the magical hopes of childhood that everything will be okay if we're just good enough, nor is it flooded out or overruled by pessimism, asking what's the point in hoping. A mature hope walks gently through each room, building altars in the corners, expressing gratitude and love for the world and its brokenness. And then it shows up for the planning meeting in order to you the vote. Wise hope, mature hope, responds to the difficulties and violences and the setbacks to pandemics of life by, yes, crying and getting angry and feeling crushed, and then applying creativity so that she doesn't stay stuck there. So in this moment, what would be a mature or a wisely hopeful response? One thought that I have is that living in reality means continuing to acknowledge the many nuances of experience. We've heard of the insect die-off that scientists have been lifting up and talking about, and we've witnessed on our windshields. And yet the other day I went for a drive and I saw so many insects on my windshield, which, you know, this is sort of a weird thing to bring up, you know, because I'm counting the number of insects by the number that have been smushed on my windshield. But it was more insects on my windshield on that drive than I've maybe seen in the last 3 or 4 years combined. And I don't know that there's science behind this, but I do know that my lived experience tells me, you know, our world slowed down for 2 months, and suddenly the insects are being able to regenerate themselves and to come back in force. I have birds on the front of my house that are joyous in their swinging and their flying from place to place. And I've never seen that before. I've lived in this home for 5 years. It absolutely is an impact of our slowing down as a result of this pandemic. Things are not just dire. There is also hope that is being expressed in this moment. I have this quote from Rebecca Solnit. She wrote this book, Hope in the Dark, Untold Histories, Wild Possibilities. And she talks about how in the Judeo-Christian tradition, in Yahweh's world, things are seen as good or bad, black or white. But that in Coyote's world, in the world of Native American tradition, things are a little more nuanced and a little more complicated than that. And she writes this: it turns out, for example, that Viagra is good for endangered species. Animal parts that traditional Chinese medicine prescribed as aphrodisiacs and for treating impotence, including from green turtles, seahorses, geckos, hooded and harp seals, and the velvet from the half-grown antlers of caribou, are, thanks to the drug, no longer in such demand. What more comic form of a mysterious unfolding of the world is there than this, which suggests that Viagra's ultimate purpose may be the survival of animals at the edges of the earth? I just want to lift up how delightful and silly and wonderful that is in a world that is full of chaos and turmoil and strangeness and unknown consequences, that some of those unknown consequences can actually be a hopeful thing, a moment for joy and celebration. I don't want at all to diminish the lives lost so far. Lost to a bad virus working in combination with a bad policy. But I do mean to say that all is not lost. Grief and loss and pain are being experienced at high levels all over this planet right now. But I guess one of the questions that I have for us is, why did we think it wouldn't come to this? War, famine, pestilence, plague. These are all the harbingers of end times according to some traditions, and the beginnings of new worlds according to others. And they are both and all and each ultimately right. We're at a threshold. We've been talking about thresholds all month. And so how can we face this moment with creativity and with a wisdom that allows us to hold both the pain and the hope at the same time? I want to give you another example of what I'm talking about. In Argentina in 2001, while our world was reeling from the 9/11 attacks, that country was reeling from a major economic collapse. The unemployment rates rose above 25% at that point, and people were hungry, and they turned to their government and to their banks and had no access. Their ATMs were actually cut off. People didn't know what to do. And in response to that moment, to that crisis point where people were suffering heavily, there came about a creative response, a new system, a bartering system that they established. And I wanted to read for you the first 4 governing points of this system that they put together in response to their crisis in Argentina. Their founding values went like this: our fulfillment as human beings should not be conditioned by money. That was a foundational statement. Our aim is to mutual help in achieving better experience of life through work, understanding, and fair trade, not to promote goods or services. We believe it is possible to replace sterile competition, profit, and speculation by reciprocity between people. We believe that our actions, products, and services can respond to ethical and ecological norms rather than to the dictates of the market, consumerism, and the search for short-term profits. And these statements go on and on. Like, I mean, they're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I encourage you to look them up. This barter system in Argentina, which replaced the market. It was a creative response to the failing of their government in order to help and support one another. And in my estimation, that is a reason to hope that we do have creative solutions to support and love one another. Those flowers that Clover brought to Barley, they didn't happen overnight. They were a result of her daily hoping, her daily inspiration, her daily willingness to look for the beauty and the creativity in the world and to gather those things together, that there might be shrines that bloom in the corners of her life and the lives of her friends. And that's what I'm calling us to. Crisis helps us to access the best in us often. And so truly, knowing that we don't know what comes next, doesn't it make sense that we get creative in response to this so that we build what comes next? We have that capacity. We can choose to create and participate in our future. As another more current example, in this catastrophic and global moment, there are people with little to no food on their tables. We know this. We know this. But also, there are neighbors who are sharing with one another, donating to local support organizations, planting more gardens, and reviving old ways of caring for themselves and in stewardship of the planet. As we go back to work, as things get opened up, are there ways for us to do this in a more sane and sustainable way? As we are predicting and modeling for the future, may we also, in our own lives, apply this hopeful wisdom, choosing what it is that we worship so that we may make it so. Thanks for being here this morning. It's so good to be together.